You're listening in on an animated discussion about the new Batman adventures with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from thecinematropolis.com. And today's topic is Cult of the Cat. Oh boy, Joshua, I think this episode was a little ahead of the curve because, as you and I know, cults have become much more popular in our pop culture in the years since this has aired. So I actually felt like, hey, did this not get made in the 2010s when we started obsessing about cults? But also, you could say it was a perfect cult episode.
Wow. Yeah, you could say that. I mean, I wouldn't, but, you know, you can.
Okay, perfect's a strong word.
You know, there is something to be said about this that, like, late 70s, mid to late 70s, you've got a lot of, like, cult fascination, I think, going on with, you know, your Manson family. It was just, like, in the zeitgeist. And then something about the 90s, like, I think the only big, I could be wrong, but I feel like the only big cult thing going on was Waco, which became much more of a conversation about like government use of force than it did about cults. And so it is interesting. Let's say it like this. This is an episode that trades in a bunch of interesting ideas, but basically moves them to the background so that we can have really cool set pieces happening in the foreground. And from that perspective, yeah, it's the most 90s cult reference ever, because you're right. Like through a lot of the 90s, I mean, that was my prime teenage years. That was just not a concern in quite the same way that it was before my time and has become again.
Yeah, definitely. You know, again, it's something that is kind of strange, like how cults have been very much kind of in the zeitgeist again. But you're right, like the 60s and 70s, a big piece. But I feel like here, if we're being really transparent about it, Joshua, the cult of the cat is just really the dressing. You could say the window dressing. You could say, oh yeah, because like essentially it's an excuse
to have a mastermind and a bunch of relatively faceless minions, and from that perspective, A++.
Faceless minions with Wolverine claws. Hello, come on. I was definitely getting Wolverine vibes during a lot of this episode.
Oh yeah.
And if you've got if you've got the cult, you got to bring in Catwoman, because why not? Why not? And by the way, she's really the star of this episode, really. It begins and it ends with her.
Okay, yes, we have some designs to chat about. And you make a really good point with the Wolverine claws. Those confused me a lot when it came to the cat ninjas. So overall, I think the cat ninja design is really good. It's simple and direct. Those flat black suits work for me on them in a way that they do not work for me on Catwoman. Like, let me digress for just a moment. We've talked about Catwoman already. I just want to reiterate, I think that the flat black costume doesn't work as well as they would like for, you know, a major character. Now, is it an improvement on her BTAS look? Yes, because almost anything would be. But even mixed into that, there is this weird choice. This is the thing I really want to harp about. Why does she have zombie skin when she's in costume? I don't get it. There is no answer. Selena doesn't look like that. How much pancake makeup does she cake on before she gets into the latex outfit? I don't get... Anyway.
Cats don't have mouths like that either, by the way.
I don't understand that choice, but I digress. I say most of that to say, I think that flat black suit works so much better on the ninjas, so much better on the, you know, faceless hordes than it does on Catwoman. I really like it. I also like they're kind of cat ears that are obviously cat ears, but different from Catwoman's, so that, you know, they stand out. And actually, they kind of remind me of the bat ears on the Golden Age Batman costume. I'm not going to bother with putting that in the show notes, but just Google the Golden Age Batman costume. You'll see what I mean. Now, here's my thought on the Wolverine claws. Again, I think that this is supposed to differentiate them from Catwoman because she almost always has, you know, 5 claws, 10 claws, I guess, one on the tip of each finger. So I think they were really realizing that they wanted to emphasize the sort of thematic similarities, but also make sure that visually Catwoman and the ninjas were as different as they could be, because she spends a lot of this episode fighting those guys.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure. I mean, we do have to remind ourselves that, you know, X-Men, the animated series, was also airing. So, I mean, I'm sure that they were just looking for an excuse to get Wolverine claws in there, because they look a lot like his. And they even sound like his claws, you know, but it's fine. It works for me, at least. I enjoyed it quite a bit. And to your point, I think they did a very good job at separating Catwoman from the cult. Everything kind of, even though the features are very similar, the functionality on the costumes is just much different overall.
Absolutely.
But Joshua, I mean, every cult needs a leader, right? So this Thomas Blake guy, what about him?
We're not going to see him again, which is fine, because he absolutely does the job of being, like, he looks like an evil cult leader. Like, you know, there's a little bit of Blofeld with the cat, walking around with the cat. He's got a little bit of that, like, extremely severe, sharp facial features that Raish or Clarion bring to the table. You know, he definitely plays the part, but he's also not that interesting, right? And I feel the same way about his lady lieutenant, who she stands out from the rest of the ninjas when she takes her mask off, but is also, like, just okay, you know? And again, they're not going to show up. So I'm not so much complaining as just going, yeah, we put the effort into the ninja thought, I think.
Yeah, no, most
and just
definitely.
kind of rubber stamped the boss and the lieutenant.
Listen, Joshua, all I'm hearing is that cult leaders are a dime a dozen. That, you know, they're like a loaf of bread, not particularly interesting. But, you know, they get the job done. They get the job. You need them, and they get the job done. I found the lieutenant design kind of weird, because when she's not in her full costume, she's in a very sexy attire. Which, by the way, I just feel like every time Catwoman is in an episode, there's this weird. I'm interested. I bet the writer's room was probably really interesting during these. But, like, I always feel like there's this weird sexual undertone to all of it. And, like, I understand there's sexual tension between Catwoman and Batman. I get that. And I know that she is known for being seductive using her charms. But I was like, wait, why is this lieutenant, like, half naked just hanging out? Like, it just seems kind of weird. But, you know, hey, it fits Bruce Timm's MO. Whenever he can draw sexy attired women in his stuff, he typically does. So, you know, there's that.
Yeah. I mean, it's fine, but you're right. It's a little weird how hard they go for the seduction route when Catwoman's talking her way out of the situation with Blake. Incidentally, before we do that, I do want to say one more thing about Blake. And this is the only disappointment. This is actually the big disappointment, but it's not disappointment with the episode. This is me bringing, you know, comic book knowledge. So comic book wise, Thomas Blake, that name is actually attached to a costumed villain called Catman. And he's Catman. And he's a villain who faced off against Batman quite a bit in the 50s and 60s, and then kind of fell off, like largely just vanished for the most part. Not entirely, but mostly, until he had a brief but intense revival by Gail Simone in the early 2000s. Unfortunately, since then, that's what I really consider, and I've talked with other people, this is not just me being an old man yelling at cloud. I think early 2000s DC was a friggin' golden age, and that they have largely left behind, and Catman's just out of nowhere sensational character rediscovery of the early 2000s has now fallen off. But this would have been very much in the space where they were just making a very deep comic book cut, but not really planning on doing Catman things, which is fine. It just makes me a little sad because I remember when he was great for about 10 minutes.
The greatness of Catman. By the way, side note, it's really interesting that he had a resurgence in the early 2000s, because I first met Catman as voiced by Adam West on The Fairly Odd Parents, which also aired during the early 2000s. I never really realized there was a comic book counterpoint because I thought it was all a joke, but apparently there might be some synergy there. I don't really know. But
interesting.
Catman, yes.
Interesting.
I think as a whole, I'm pretty happy with the cultness of it. Okay, listen, we got blood sacrifices, we got Wolverine claws, they're open to using guns, they got cool motorcycles, they seem to follow you everywhere. You know, they've got an extra creepy layer. Where do they find these things? Holy cow.
Yes. I love the lair that is like this penthouse office building thing, but also has the obvious cult basement. And I just wonder sometimes if Batman's not paying enough attention. Like, maybe he should literally be pulling everybody's building permits, you know, on a monthly basis, just to make sure that somebody's not building a cult basement in their office, you know. But yeah, the design of the whole thing is spectacular.
He's got to stop and say, all right, I see you, Colt. Okay, there's these 10 buildings. I gotta routinely inspect all of these to make sure there's not a cult building stuff in the basement.
Right. Honestly. I mean, okay, as an aside, I have often joked with friends about the idea of like Bruce Wayne opening a bar that's called the Double Deuce, leaving it open for a month and then just closing it. And then opening a comedy club that's, you know, the Laugh Track or whatever for like 2 months and then closing it. And then just setting up video cameras inside it. And the minute that, you know, Two-Face moves into the Double Deuce or Joker moves into the Laugh Track, he just hits a button in the cave and all the windows shutter over with steel and he just calls the cops. Like, work smarter, not harder, right? And that's the level of where I'm like, surely a man who himself has to build crime-fighting super basements would be a man who's paying attention to other people's weird basement choices on the building permits.
You know, that's a great point. Batman, step up your game, man. Step up your game.
Sometimes being the world's greatest detective means being proactive. That's what I'm trying to say.
Proactivity. You know, he's so busy reacting to all the other villains, though. He doesn't have time for that, Joshua. Come on now. And he's got to run Wayne Enterprises. He's a busy man. He doesn't have time to be looking in basements.
You're right. You're right.
So I wanted to shift gears here just a little bit to talk about the ongoing chemistry or sexual tension between Catwoman and Batman, because I feel like it's actually on pretty good display here. I mentioned a second ago that, you know, really Catwoman, Selena Kyle, this is her episode. It starts and ends with her, and the only reason she gets into this mess is she just happens to be stealing from a cat cult. And I really enjoyed the banter when Batman shows up. He's like, hey, you need a place to stay tonight? And she's like, yeah. He's like, all right, jail. I laughed out loud audibly with that line.
It's a good line. It's very good. I liked it a lot.
So what do you make, Joshua? I mean, like, are we still on the pro Batman Selena Kyle train? Do you like it? Is it kind of worn on you at this point?
Do you know what's interesting to me is that I feel like in this episode, at least, that sexual tension is very one-sided. Like, Catwoman still seems very interested in Batman, but Batman really does not seem that interested in her as an object of romance or affection. I don't think that's going to become typical, and it might just be because there was already sort of enough going on in this episode, because, side note, there is a lot of really great, this is not a super deep episode, but it is so fun. And the reversals between Catwoman and Batman and Blake are all expertly done. Like, there's not I don't think we're going to stumble into some deep themes like we did in our last episode about Bizarro, but I do applaud how well put together this episode is. That said, maybe it was just there was enough going on, but it really does feel to me like she's still real into him and he's just not very into her.
Joshua, how could you not be into Batman with those freaking monster-sized forearms he apparently has? When they rip the saber. Oh, by the way, we haven't even mentioned the saber-tooth tiger they've got in their cult basement yet. Like, when the saber-tooth tiger rips off his costume, his forearms, look at them, they're massive. Massive.
Yeah, he's got some Popeye stuff going on.
Yeah, so I guess I can't blame Catwoman for being into that sort of thing. Meanwhile, also Catwoman is dressed in a nightgown randomly, like a very sexy nightgown at the end randomly, but that's beside the point. Anyway, so yeah.
Well, I think we're doing a diamonds are a girl's best friend kind of thing there at the end, but sure. Even so, Bruce, calm down. Bruce Timm, rein it in just a little bit.
just turn it, like, it's okay a little, just turn down like one notch, maybe two, and I think we're good.
Right.
We're good. Yeah, but so that's a good point, because it does seem pretty one-sided, and at the end of the day, it seems like Batman's pretty set to understand that Selena Kyle's not really changing. You know, she tries to talk him, you know, sweet talk him throughout the episode and say, no, I've changed. But every actual opportunity, she absolutely tries to steal stuff and get away. And so yeah, Batman's on point. Maybe he's just tired of her shenanigans.
I mean, I think at this point, we've got Talia floating around in the background as a potential love interest. Maybe he's just like, you know, I can't get her to stop stealing. All this, pardon the pun, cat and mouse stuff is fun, but, you know, I'm just not that into her. But it is really interesting how much, again, it's like they're pushing the tension between Batman and Catwoman, but only from one direction. And then they have this like extremely half-hearted seduction of Thomas Blake going on. I'm not really complaining because, again, overall, I really like this episode. But if you want to dial in on whatever is going on with various sexual tensions, there are some weird choices, I feel.
Most definitely. And maybe it's just maybe it's just I turned this on a Saturday morning and this is what showed up, but I felt like it was all over this episode.
Yeah, no, I think it really is. And again, it's so often the case between Batman and Catwoman. And in this case, I almost love the fact that Batman's not that into her because it really plays up this sort of odd couple thing that's going on here where we've seen them work together much more seamlessly than this. But when they work together seamlessly, it's because for whatever reason, their purposes have aligned, right? And in this case, their purposes are never aligned. And so the whole thing is just like a Keystone Cops comedy of errors between the two of them where, you know, they're almost getting their heads blown off. They're almost getting burned in furnaces. They're almost getting eaten by giant genetically engineered saber-toothed tigers. It works out in the end, but almost despite them or in spite of them than because of them.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. I don't necessarily want to go through each and every really cool action set piece, but I gotta say, nice twist with Catwoman figuring out how to wrangle the genetically engineered saber-tooth tiger. That was a nice swap because I didn't expect it. So when it happened, I was like, oh, now there was at least 2 or 3 times during that whole fight where people were changing sides and like the dynamics were totally shifting. Just super fun. There's not a lot to it other than just a really well executed like 3-way fight, you could say.
No, and what I appreciate the most about her befriending the saber-toothed tiger is that they had actually telegraphed that with Chekhov's panther at the beginning. You know, like she runs into their panther and they think, well, this is it, we're done. And she just makes friends with the panther. And we've seen her have that kind of rapport and empathy with big cats before. So again, a little bit of continuity build, but they also didn't trot it out of nowhere in the third act in a way that might have been a little hacky. They telegraphed it at the beginning with a smaller but still scary big cat. It's good. It's good storytelling with these reversals and double crosses and triple crosses and who's actually on whose side. And yeah, I just really appreciate the action, both the actual set pieces of all the car chases and the gunfights and the you know, dodging snipers through smoke and all that stuff is so good. And it would be good on its own, but supported by all of this like character reversal. For just being a little bit of a throwaway, I think this is kind of an A++ episode.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think it's actually pretty stellar. It achieves everything I would want. It's really fun, not a lot of depth, but the character dynamics are great. The action's well thought out, choreographed, the reversals. Yeah, people, check it out. This is great. This is a great episode of the new Batman Adventures.
And Caleb, I think we probably telegraphed a little bit of our alternate media recommendations at the top of the show, getting very focused on the cult end of things. But do tell me, if people are enjoying Cult of the Cat from the cult perspective, what things do you think they should be reading or watching or experiencing?
I just want to say, I want to reiterate, guys, the 2010s has been an embarrassment of riches in films related to cults. So it's just a thing. I don't know if it's true crime podcasts or podcasts about cults, if that's what started. But either way, it's still in the zeitgeist. So I'm just going to go with a series of ones that I really liked that came out in the last 10 years. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Tarantino's most recent film. I actually really like the film. It's in my opinion, one of his best films. It's a very fun an interesting look back at a what-if scenario with the Marilyn Manson Sharon Tate murders. So anyway, note there. There's The Invitation from 2015, which is a movie about a bunch of house guests who get together and realize that some of us are in a cult and some of us aren't. We're not really sure who is, and it just really creates a really strong single location sort of cult film. Midsommar, which came out a couple of years ago. This is from the same director who did Hereditary. This is into pagan cults in Eastern Germany. Oh boy, this is a movie that will you want to see some crazy stuff, watch Midsommar. And then lastly, a personal favorite, just because I don't think enough people saw it, is actually the film adaptation of Dr. Sleep, which is the sequel to Stephen King's The Shining. This is just a really great film, stars Ewan McGregor, and it's very rich themes about the impact of trauma and how that trauma can impact an individual. Obviously the trauma being from the film / book The Shining, but also there happens to be a cult of like vampires who suck. They're not blood-sucking vampires. They like suck the souls and life force out of people, and they travel around the country like weird sort of like soul vampires. But they are definitely a cult. They are very cult-ish. Again, I just want people to see this movie because it tanked the box office, and it was so very good. Joshua, that's just a few of my favorites. What alternate media recommendations do you have for us today?
I went towards a much goofier end of the spectrum because sometimes I feel like the best way to deal with things that are this legitimately scary in real life is to treat them like ridiculous things, because underneath every cult, no matter how, and I mean, listen, don't let me downplay it, they're very scary. You can lose family members to them. A lot of people are doing that right now with kind of political cults. So I don't mean to downplay it, but at the same time, every cult has this core idea. They're different ideas. It's not the same idea, but they're always like ridiculous. Like there's just something silly about what's going on underneath there. So from that end, I have chosen two that undermine the seriousness of cults in ways that I enjoy. The first is a Netflix original called The Babysitter. And it's basically, what if Home Alone were a teenage kid and instead of two robbers, it was a satanic cult that was trying to sacrifice him. And if that doesn't grab you, you can skip it. But honestly, why would that not grab you? Come on.
It's great. No, The Babysitter is fantastic. Both the original and the sequel are awesome.
A companion piece to that would be a Shudder original, Satanic Panic. Now, bits of Satanic Panic can be as slapsticky as The Babysitter, but it also goes for some like real, legitimate, genuine scares off and on. And my personal favorite part is that Rebecca Romijn is the head of the cult, and that's trying to murder the pizza delivery girl. And Rebecca Romijn just chews this scenery expertly. Like if you could somehow just get a supercut that was her storming around the place being the boss of the cult, it would be worth it on its own. She is fantastic. So highly recommend both The Babysitter, I agree about the sequel, but I was trying to keep my list short, and Satanic Panic. That about wraps it up for this animated discussion. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, come find us on Twitter. Caleb is at CMastersTalk, and I'm at Joshua Unruh, and the hashtag is Animated Discussion. Caleb, where else can people find you?
Well, I'm the editor-in-chief and a contributor at the Cinematropolis, a website that specializes in in-depth film critique and analysis, and we publish our in-depth essays on all types of films right on over at thecinematropolis.com. I also just want to plug a special interview series we're doing on the Cinematic Schematic right now called 3 Films That Got You Through the 2020 Pandemic, where I'm speaking with professionals from around different aspects of the film industry to talk about how the pandemic impacted their business and their work, and the 3 films that helped them get through it all.
Remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. Show your support by pledging at Patreon or by leaving a great review on Apple Podcasts to make it easier for more people to find us and join in the discussion.
And of course, the links to Patreon, Apple Podcasts, our recommendations, and Twitter, those are all easy to find in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us for this animated discussion. We'll be back next time to talk about the Superman the Animated Series episode, Target.
We'll see you back here. Same bat time, same bat channel.